Out of all Nintendo's major IPs, none have gotten quite as many titles as Fire Emblem this year. We had a gacha mobile game that's earned them some ridiculous amount of money, a remake of a game that even some of the most hardcore fans have never played, and now a hack and slash spin-off. It's been a busy year for Nintendo in general with the release of the Switch and all, but even with its growing popularity as one of Nintendo's heavy hitters, I can't remember the last time Fire Emblem got this much attention. Of course, if you're a Fire Emblem fan, you might not mind all the attention this series about blue-haired anime swordsman is currently getting. Or maybe you do for some reason. Regardless, this is Fire Emblem Warriors. Fire Emblem Warriors is a spin-off of Nintendo's popular strategy RPG Fire Emblem, set in the style of the Musou genre, which I can only imagine is Japanese for scantily clad men and women slaughter hundreds of paper men that can die to a stray wind. The game is of course published by Nintendo, but is developed by Omega Force and Team Ninja, the two guys that made the previous Warriors spin-off, Hyrule Warriors. It's technically the first Fire Emblem game on the Nintendo Switch, but it also got a 3DS release for the new 3DS. That being said, this is a review for the Switch version, so don't go expecting any tips on the 3DS one. The story takes place in the fictional medieval land
Itolis
and follows the adventures of the twin prince and princess Rohan and Liana. After the sudden calamity of monsters raining from the sky and besieging their castle, the twins are forced to flee their home and run to safety, taking with them an artifact that may hold the key to saving their world. Eventually, they stumble upon a cadre of incredibly attractive allies who claim to have come from different worlds, and working together, they decide to try and defeat this evil and get to the bottom of this mystery. As the title suggests, Fire Emblem Warriors is set to the style of the popular Dynasty Warriors style of games, where characters take to a battlefield and fight their way through hundreds of incredibly weak enemies that they're free to bat around like tennis balls in incredibly flashy and entertaining ways, all while attempting to complete objectives such as killing bosses, taking bases, and occasionally fighting opponents that can match their strength. The game takes form in two main modes of play, that being Story Mode and History Mode. Story Mode is exactly what is suggested. You play through the main story of the campaign, going from one mission to another, following the royal twins of Rohan and Liana as they try to save their home from destruction with the help of several Fire Emblem heroes.
Fire Emblem!
No, not that one. History Mode instead loosely follows various scenarios based on events from previous Fire Emblem games, where you have to complete various missions with specific objectives set to the backdrop of said event. The main difference that History has from Story Mode is that in History Mode, you can pretty much use whoever you want whenever you want for each mission, but in Story Mode, you can only use specific characters the first time you clear a chapter. You can only use whoever you want when you replay a chapter after beating it. Finally, the only way to unlock more scenarios for History Mode is by either playing Story Mode, collecting mementos from the merchant Anna, and by buying DLC. As said before, the game follows a hack and slash formula. You take control over one of your many characters as you fight your way through a map, slaughtering anything that stands in your way. Each character comes with a different moveset and a weapon type, whether it be a sword, axe, lance, bow, or magic tome, which they can use to cut a swath through the masses. Each map typically consists of three major elements: enemies, forts, and bosses. Successfully completing a mission requires you to use your own forces to overcome these three things, while also dealing with some minor objectives along the way. You see, in addition to the hundreds of hapless soldiers that you can cut through on the battlefield, you've also got hundreds of your own minions that are backing you up, while the enemy will also be moving them down in droves. However, how many people you have backing you up and how effective they are in battle depends on the forts that you control on the map. The forts are your main lines of reinforcement in Fire Emblem Warriors and are often key locations that need to be taken and defended in order to flow the tide of battle in your direction. There's also the fact that occasionally forts will have additional benefits that you can take control of if you manage to capture them, such as having a ballista on your side that will rain down hell on your enemies opposed to being rained down on you, or that have the dragon veins which can reshape terrain and give you access to more of the map. Capturing forts and objectives will make your life a lot easier in the long run since it weakens the enemy forces and makes it easier on your allies. Because while you are smart enough and capable enough to fight the enemy, your AI allies are not so much. Ultimately, capturing forts and objectives and killing enemies will open up the path for you to defeat the enemy bosses, which are stronger enemies that are more on an even playing field with you. 9 times out of 10, the objective for clearing a mission in Fire Emblem Warriors requires you to defeat the enemy boss, specifically the main enemy commander that's holed up in their main base. However, most of the time this objective is not available right off the bat. You gotta work your way towards it by capturing other forts, completing other objectives, and eventually driving them out of hiding so you can get in there and kick their ass. Once you do, you sheathe your weapon, strike a pose, and then give a one-liner, then get ready for the next mission.
I hope nobody got hurt.
Something that a lot of people who have played the Warriors style of games will tell you is that a lot of them suffer from the same problem, that being that they're repetitive and they get old pretty quick. I'll be upfront with you, I've never played a mainstay game of the Dynasty Warriors series, only the spin-offs, specifically the Gundam Dynasty Warrior games. I never played Hyrule Warriors either, despite having some mild interest in it since I really liked the character design and I'm a longtime fan of Zelda. With that in mind, I'm still aware of the general opinion of the Warriors genre of games, that being that a lot of them play the same and a lot of them get pretty repetitive. It's not hard to see why people often have that mindset either. Most maps and encounters in this game play out in a very similar fashion. You run into a mob of enemies, spam the light attack and heavy attack buttons and whatever combo fits your fancy, and then after killing enough dudes, you use your character's super attack to wipe out whatever's left in the field. Then head off to find the next mob of enemies to rinse and repeat. The only time you might be given brief pause is when an optional objective appears or when you run into a boss. Naturally, this kind of thing can get a bit repetitive after a while, and since it's the same formula that's followed in every single Warriors game, it's not hard to see why people keep giving these games flack over this in reviews. Fire Emblem Warriors does suffer from this too a bit, but at the same time, I am very impressed by what the game does for its identity as a Fire Emblem game. If you know anything about Fire Emblem, then you know that it is a strategy RPG built around making weighted decisions that can result in life or death situations for your army. It's about preparation and planning, about arming your units with the best equipment to tackle the enemy, and to use their individual strengths and weaknesses to push towards victory. It's a strategy game, a thinking game, not a game where you just mash the attack buttons until you win. To that end, it might be hard to see how that kind of game can transition to the hack and slash genre while still maintaining any sense of identity that it had in its main series, but I feel like Fire Emblem Warriors did a pretty great job in doing that. At its core, Fire Emblem Warriors follows the key principles of the other Warriors games they've laid out. You attack forts, defeat bosses, and complete minor objectives to emerge victorious. However, where Fire Emblem Warriors shines is the fine mechanics themselves. There's several elements of the main Fire Emblem series that are implemented into Fire Emblem Warriors in a very effective way. Things like the weapon triangle, for example, the rock, paper, scissors system that most Fire Emblem games operate on, where certain weapons have strengths and weaknesses against other specific weapons. For example, if a sword user in Fire Emblem Warriors goes up against someone with an axe, they'll have an advantage being able to do more damage while taking less, and will be able to deplete a special meter on the enemy called the stun gauge, which will allow them to get a critical hit if they deplete it all the way. Meanwhile, if you attack an enemy that you have disadvantage with, you'll be fighting an uphill battle since you'll be taking more damage and doing even less. Of course, you can still win encounters like these, just like you could if you were going against the triangle in regular Fire Emblems, but it won't be quite as easy. And that's assuming you don't just use your super transformation called Awakening Mode and make everything weak to you for a limited amount of time and then top it all off with a huge finisher. There's also the subjects for equipment itself, like how you can equip your characters with different weapons that have different attributes, just like you could in Fire Emblem, or how you can reforge weapons with various attributes to make them stronger like in the main games, or how you can use a Master Seal to upgrade your character to a stronger version of their class after a certain level, and how you can equip that character with new skills to make them better. Characters can also fight together with a pair-up system to get more bonuses and rank up their support level, which can also lead to them having a heart-to-heart conversation once they max out their bond. You can even choose to play the game on Classic Mode, where a character death is permanent. Which, to be honest, is actually probably not worth it. Sure, in the home series, permanent death is a pretty important staple of Fire Emblem, but in this game, it doesn't carry quite the same impact. Mostly because, as I said before, the AI in this game is really stupid. If my characters die in a regular Fire Emblem game, it can usually be attributed to my fault, but in Warriors, I can only do so much micromanaging to keep my squishy archers from running off to fight the invincible boss enemies over and over again. It is slightly mitigated by the ability to revive characters through a special shop service, but considering how expensive and time consuming it is, I think I'm just gonna stick to casual for this one. There's so many little things like this that play into the feel of a Fire Emblem game, whether it be the actual mechanics themselves or subtle things like musical cues when you level up or when you get a critical strike. And that's not even getting into the strategy aspect that the game has during gameplay itself. Before each mission starts, you can arrange your characters on the board where you want them to start the battle, which you'll probably pick based on what types of enemies are near them that they'll be strong against. Once the battle itself starts, you can still bring up the map at any time to give them commands, like if you need Elise to run across the battlefield to heal someone in danger, or if you want someone to attack a specific fort or enemy while you go after the bigger fish. If you really need to micromanage, you can just take direct control of one of your other units and start kicking ass as them instead. It's really impressive to me that this hack and slash game that falls into what people consider to be a fairly generic genre at this point can maintain its identity with its main series so well. Fire Emblem Warriors isn't a true Fire Emblem game at face value, but when you get past the hack and slash foreground, it manages to capture several elements of Fire Emblem while integrating it into another genre and still keeping it a lot of fun. But with most things, I do still have some complaints about it. So with that said, let's just go ahead and address the elephant in the room. Steven, what are you doing here, man? I am, of course, talking about the roster. Before we go too far into this, I want to make one thing very clear when it comes to crossover games of any kind. You cannot please everyone. No matter who you decide to put in your game, there will be any number of people crying about how they are a wasted character slot or how they stole it from someone else. You want an easy example? Just go visit a Super Smash Bros. Forum and read back to any time they announce a new character. When Fire Emblem Warriors was first announced, a lot of longtime fans of the series were worried because the only characters that seemed to be getting any sort of attention seemed to be from the newer games, Fire Emblem Awakening and Fates, and the original series that deals with the OG Lord and series mascot, Marth. Awakening and Fates in particular are fairly polarizing games with the longtime fan base of Fire Emblem, a lot of people thinking that they don't live up to the popularity that they have, or that Nintendo doesn't seem to care that much about the older Fire Emblem games anymore, only banking in on Awakening and Fates since those are the games that have revitalized interest in the series and brought in a lot of new fans, so that's who they want to appeal to now. To that end, people were concerned that Fire Emblem Warriors was going to go that route, even though as a crossover game, it had the potential to bring in any character from across the series. Well, as of release, the playable roster is as follows. 9 characters from Fates, 6 characters from Awakening, 3 characters from Shadow Dragon, 2 original characters, 1 from Blazing Sword, and 1 from Shadows of Valentia. Also 1 Anna. So in the end, roughly 2/3 of the initial playable roster are from Awakening and Fates, whereas only a smidgen are from Marth's game, and Lyn and Celica are in the game essentially as glorified cameos who are not even in the main story. There's even a few characters like Aboro, Niles, Owain, and Navare who are in the game but are not playable yet. If I'm being honest, I actually like Awakening and Fates a lot. I would actually rate Awakening as one of my favorite Fire Emblem games. And at this point, I've pretty much played all of them, save for the Famicom ones. I recognize that the game has flaws and it's not perfect, but I still enjoyed the hell out of it. I also enjoyed Fates a lot, and I think it improved on a lot of things that Awakening had trouble with, while still having some other flaws of its own, specifically in its writing and some of the character design choices. But even I have to say that I'm a bit disappointed in how the final roster ended up looking. The great thing about a crossover game is that you have the potential to pull from anywhere in your series, and you have the potential to introduce people to characters that they may have never met before and have the chance to grow attached to them. Do you know how many characters I knew in the original Super Smash Bros. When it came out? 7 out of 12. And you know what? Once I got to playing as Samus and Captain Falcon and started to like them, I sure as hell wanted to try out their home games and find out what they were like there, hence how I soon came to love the Metroid and F-Zero series. I can understand if Nintendo wants to bank on the popularity of Fates and Awakening because they feel like their newer fanbase wants to play as these characters from those games, but they don't have to only include those characters. A crossover game doesn't have to be just about providing fan service. It can also be an opportunity to introduce people to older aspects of a series. I mean, really, if you want a direct parallel, just look at Nintendo's mobile game Fire Emblem Heroes. It has them rolling in cash ever since it launched. That game started with mostly Fates and Awakening characters, but they've been doing nothing but adding older characters all year, save for a few events. And they have been wildly successful. People don't want to just experience the same thing over and over again. They want a touch of familiarity, yes, but they also want to be introduced to something new, even if they don't know that the new is actually old. I like the characters who are in the game just fine. In particular, I think the decision to make Lissa an axe wielder as if a magic user was a stroke of genius. I just wish the representation was a little bit more varied. Also, I'm only slightly miffed that if they were going to go with Fate's characters, they didn't put Arthur in. I mean, I love the guy, but I also had this whole thing planned out for the credit sequence of this episode. It was going to use the audio from My Hero Academia where All Might fights Nomu. It was going to be great, but no, they denied me that. And now, nobody gets to enjoy it. Also gotta admit that they all look pretty awesome moving in 3D HD graphics. Also, everyone is suddenly even more beautiful for some reason. I mean, my god, Cordelia, you're gorgeous! Jiminy Christmas, all I did was put lipstick on you. Fire Emblem Warriors is a fun game, is pretty much exactly what I expected it to be, while still surprising me a little. It's a fun hack and slash romp that you can plop down and play for an hour or two every so often and still get a good time out of it, even with friends on a split screen. And that seems like something that shouldn't be a selling point, but considering how few games do this now, I consider it to be one. Yeah, the roster is a bit disappointing for me, but mostly because of wasted potential, but like I said about the thing with crossover games, you can't please everyone. And even if Lynn isn't part of the main story, I can't deny being pumped that she's in the game at all. I like Fire Emblem Warriors, and I feel like my purchase is justified, but if you're on the fence about it because you're not sure if it's a game you'd enjoy, or if you just don't like the character representation, you might want to hold off on buying it for now. Just know that I do feel like this game does Fire Emblem justice, and ended up being a lot more fun than I expected it to be.
You may have heard these words before, but I'll teach you what they really mean. Go beyond!